The year was 1833, and Irishman Robert Thompson boarded a ship with his wife, Lydia, and his son, Richard. Together, they set out to cross the ocean and reach the United States, and they made it. And the plan actually worked. They made it to the United States, and they worked until they had an opportunity to realize their dream, and that was to move out to the wilderness and become pioneers and start farms. And so today we are metal detecting the barn of Richard Thompson, the 7-year-old boy that crossed the ocean with his family to come to the United States. So this is Richard Thompson's actual picture right here. And he learned the ways of construction and agriculture from his father. And when he grew up, he had a farm with 20 horses and 20 cows and about 30 pigs. So this is where his barn was. So check out my first signal. So this hole right here is about elbow deep, and the detector kept saying there's something down there, and I kept thinking, how much deeper do you have to go? And finally I hit something that scraped. And so this pinpointer helped me recognize that there really was something down there, because it's deep. Look at this. So here we have this horse bit, and this right here, this is huge. This is probably for one of those, you know, those jumbo draft horses. So I don't think that this horse bit sunk that deep. I think that probably somebody dug a hole for a post or something like that, and then they just had some junk laying around, so they just threw it in the bottom of the hole. Because here's a good sign right here. This is very interesting because when I go to these 1800s homesteads, I find this stuff a lot. This is a really good sign because I find these all the time. It's one of those brown stoneware bowls. It's glazed, and I guess it probably looked like this at one time. Now, if this was a barn, they were probably using this to feed baby chicks. I think, you know, your guess is as good as mine. Here is a barrel strap, and I know that the barn was here because his house on the map is that way. So the next building on the property would have been the barn, and the barn disappeared off the map. And in 1912 there was nothing here, and in 1938 again there was nothing here, and in 1955 this was just nothing. 1980s this was nothing, and then in modern day times it's just woods now. So we're on the side of a hill right here, and so I was kind of hoping that this would be the place where the family that lived and worked here threw some of their garbage, and I think I found some down here. Alright, so this was a big signal on my metal detector, and I dug it, and I was not disappointed. Now this is just junk. I mean, this is garbage that they threw out, but here what we have is a wash basin, right? So the wash basin had these handles on it here, and you would hold it and you could rest it against your hip or your belt buckle or something. And so I guess they took this outside to wash the dishes. And here's one of their mason jars, and check out the date on this piece of glass right here. Very interesting to note that people ate freshwater oysters. I imagine that was the kids' job. You would send the kids down to the river, which isn't far from here, and say, okay kids, come back with oysters. I don't know what Richard Thompson's house looked like, but I did actually find a picture of his brother's house. And so if you look at this house right here, it was built with the trees that came out of the area. Around here, that would have been walnut trees. But you have to imagine that, you know, they didn't have any refrigeration, no electricity, you know. So if you wanted to do the dishes, you had to take them outside and wash them by the pump well. And then if you wanted dessert, then you canned apples, you know. Around here it probably would have been apples. And then if you wanted to eat something fresh, you had to go get it from the river. And I imagine that after a while you got tired of eating salt pork and smoked meat and all that preserved stuff like that. very good find. I'm pretty happy with this. This was most likely hers. His wife's name was Lovina Williams, and if you look at this picture here, you'll see this is a picture of her and him. She looked like a really thin, pretty lady, and this find right here has just absolutely got to be hers. Look at this. So this right here is a thimble. Now, is there such a thing as a half thimble, because it's either ripped in half or it's just purposely half a thimble? But I mean, this had to have been hers, because they had 7 kids and I'm sure she had a lot of sewing to do, and maybe she took her thimble on the wagon when they went to town so that she could sew while they took that long trip to town. So many sticks and spider webs and thorns and everything in here. When they had a farm here, it wouldn't have been like this. All of this brush, all these trees would have been cut down. This is pretty amazing right here. It looks like it's a broken piece of pie plate, like a stoneware pie plate type of thing. So maybe they were using that to put animal feed in or something like that, but you never know. But that's a great find. I mean, the fact that we can find a pure spot where most of the things that we find probably came from the people who owned it, it's an amazing story. Here we have a great find, and I actually broke this one by jumping on it with the shovel. There's all these roots here, pretty thick, heavy roots, and when you dig here, they get in the way. So you put the shovel down and then jump on it with both feet, and it cuts through the roots. And you can see what I did there. So here we have what's known as a curry comb, and this right here would have had a wood handle on it, would have been painted black, and this right here would have been like silver colored, and you can see where I broke it by jumping on it. But Richard Thompson was really good with horses, really good with livestock and animals. The history book that I read said that when he was a young boy, maybe 10 years old, he used to go into the woods and cut down trees and hook chains to them and drag them out with a team of oxen. That's quite an accomplishment for a 10-year-old boy. And so this right here would not have been thrown out. Somebody probably lost this. They probably had it on a wagon or something, and it fell off, and maybe in the wintertime it fell into snow. But over 100 years later, here it is. This is probably the biggest thing that I ever found, and it's the find of the day. It's amazing, and look at this. I had all types of trouble trying to figure out what was going on. The metal detector was giving me a crazy signal right here. The pinpointer was pinpointing way too big of an area. It didn't seem like it was real. And so I put this back in the ground for a dramatic effect, but when I pulled it out, this is what I saw. Look at this. It slid just out like that. I wiped the dirt off, and we have this. Wow, look at that. Is that sinister looking or what? Let me get my shirt out of the way. Wow, this thing is crazy looking. It's a scythe, yeah. And so that's a good find. I mean, that's a big find. It's typical of a barn. That's typical of 1800s, you know. I don't know how old it is, but that's amazing. And that somebody dropped this here. It's on the side of the hill. They might have been working here and chopping stuff up, and they dropped it. And look at that. These genealogy videos can be so demoralizing because you have a subject and a story, and the subject deserves to be honored and the story deserves to be told, and then you go out there and you find nothing but cans and garbage. But this is a pure site. Nothing was ever here. I have studied these maps, and so sometimes I think, like, is this true? Could this really be possible? I mean, you had a little boy that left Ireland and crossed the ocean in a ship with sails. And they came to the United States, and they went to Ohio, and then they went to Chicago, and then they came here as pioneers. And when this Richard was a little boy, his father used to grow crops, grain, and take it to Chicago, which is a 3-hour drive from here. And back in those days, back in 1830s, the road to Chicago was an Indian trail. And so you had your wagon, and then you had to stop and constantly cut down trees that fall in the pathway. And so it took them, according to what I read, 3 weeks to get to Chicago and sell the grain. And so they took the money and they bought a couple barrels of flour and I think 2 barrels of salt. And the road was so impassable that they ended up abandoning half of what they bought. They just left it, lightened the load, and went all the way back home. So that's an amazing story. I mean, can you imagine getting on a wagon with your grain and being gone for 3 weeks? And then it took 3 weeks to come back. And then your wife was at home and she was taking care of the animals and taking care of the chickens and taking care of the little kids, and she was home alone while you were gone for 6 weeks. That's how long it took. And when you find something like this and hold it in your hands, it's like it seems unreal. A few interesting notes on this picture here. If you look at Richard and his wife, they appear to be holding hands. And that's rare to see affection from this time period. Secondly, we see that Richard is wearing a white hat and everyone else is wearing a black hat. I wonder if that was meant to distinguish him. I know that he was a school supervisor for many years, and that's not bad for a guy that only went to school for 2 months out of the year during the winter. Now, in contrast, if you look at his brother, and here's a picture of his brother. He was a typical 1800s wild man, and he had that long hair and unkempt beard. And if you look at Richard, he looked a lot different than that. Lastly, if you look at his wife, she has very shiny shoes, and she's holding an umbrella. Maybe she was one of those people that is always prepared.